If you could ask for any one personal capacity to help you on your life journey, what would you ask for? Empathy? The capacity to walk in someone else's shoes? Or would you ask for strength? The strength to keep going when you're tired and drained and stripped of joy? Or would you ask for the ability to forgive, to let go of the hurt that another has done to you, so that it would no longer eat at your insides, gnaw at your heart, keep you awake in the dark hours of the night? Perhaps you would ask for gratitude, for when that flows freely, it washes inexorably into generosity and faith. All these personal capacities are important, but for help on our life journeys, I wonder if the personal capacity to listen, to really listen, may be the most important. Now, this probably sounds odd. After all, we all know that listening is one of the best gifts we can give to each other, but can it really be one of the best gifts we receive ourselves? Listening is terribly important to the person being listened to. The feminist movement of the 20th century articulated a really interesting idea, being heard into speech, they called it. The idea was that really deep listening was so powerful that it could help people realize what they needed to say, even if they didn't know what that was before they started speaking. It would help them realize what was the most important thing about their life, or the things about their lives, things that until they were listened to in that way, they had not even known themselves. This kind of deep listening is a radical act and an incredible gift. You can see from this why listening is the most important part of pastoral care. The theologian Paul Tillich said that the first duty of love is to listen. Another writer put it this way. She wrote, "Deep listening is miraculous for the listener and the speaker. When someone receives us with open-hearted, non-judging, intensely interested listening, our spirits expand and healing happens." But listening is not just a gift we can give to those who need to speak and heal. It's also a deeply spiritual practice for the listener. When we do it well, we practice, and so we learn humility, which is really a sense of our right size in this universe. When we do it well, we can experience the unity of life with life, or perhaps an intimate connection with the holy through that listening connection. Listening also leads us on a path to spiritual maturity. One of the paths we can follow towards spiritual maturity is that of the arc of the moral universe. Martin Luther King Jr. took some words of the 19th century Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker, and made them prettier, made them sound better. But the basic idea was the same. He noted that the arc of the moral universe bends long, but it bends towards justice. That's a path that we can walk with listening. In a sermon, I think a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about how it was family members listening to their gay and lesbian loved ones talk about their lives that really changed things for gay and lesbian people and eventually bisexual and transgender people in our country. It was that listening and that speaking that over time culminated in changed social attitudes, laws protecting our civil rights, and in some places, like the wonderful state that we live in, our relationships and our families being treated with the dignity and the respect that we all want through legal marriage. This is a spiritual, moral maturity, and it's come from the ability to listen to voices that were in some ways on the margins of society. It's not easy for folks It was not easy for folks who thought gay people were evil or dangerous to listen. It isn't easy for any of us to really listen, to listen well, even when the other person doesn't seem dangerous or bad, or even when we care deeply about the person who is speaking. There are many reasons for this. One of them, I think, is because our cultural tradition values self-expression and individualism so highly that even our most common idea of prayer involves speaking to the holy rather than listening to the holy. Still, we can learn to listen better. And it sounds pretty easy, doesn't it, to be attentive and open and non-judging? It sounds easy until we pay attention to ourselves as we try to listen. And that's what the Time for All Ages telephone conversation was about. Because no matter who or even what we're trying to listen to, there's some very human things that get in our way. And I'm going to read a few of these things, and I'd love to see you raise your hand if you recognize yourself in any of these statements. One thing that happens is sometimes we think about what we're going to say while we're supposed to be listening. We think about what we're going to say as soon as we get that chance. Another barrier is that we start thinking about where our story, our own story, intersects the story that the person speaking is telling. And we go off on the trajectory of our story. Another is assuming that we know what the speaker is going to say, perhaps even interrupting them to tell them what they're about to say. Another is listening to our own personal beliefs and our own judgments as they start evaluating the message or the speaker and popping up into our brain. I ask you to think about which of these common barriers you find yourself tripping on. Do you understand why you do them? Can you name them in your head? Do you understand why you might do those? These barriers are really trap doors. They lead us down a chute that sends us flying away from understanding what we're hearing or reading, from communicating care and respect and value of the other person. The trap doors that I just described often come from our assumptions about other people, and just as often they come from our own personal agendas. They come from who we think we are, what we want to get done, how we want to be treated or thought of. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and think of 4 words that describe yourself, 4 words for your identity. And if you have 4, now reflect on what is it about these 4 words, about who you think you are, that can get in the way of your ability to listen. I'm going to share a story with you now to help you see what I'm talking about in terms of an identity piece that gets in the way of understanding and listening. It's a little bit of my own story. I was convinced for a very long time that I was very special because of my hard life and my grief, and that got in the way of my listening. One of the reasons I knew that I was special because of my hard life and my grief was because of a memory I had. The memory was of a long time ago. When I was a child in elementary school, I was exploring my mother's cherry veneer dresser. You know how some kids need to go in every corner of the house and open all of the cigar boxes and all the drawers to find out what's there. Well, this was a bottom drawer in the dresser that she usually kept locked, but for some reason it wasn't locked that day. as I went through that treasure, that special drawer that I had never looked in before, I found some odd things. One of them was I found some clipped locks of hair in a folded white tissue paper. And then I found a very familiar-looking orange woolen cap. With a feeling that came close to dread and fascination, like a moth coming closer to the flame, I went to my mother with these things and I asked her, "What are these?" I remember she seemed upset and she reached for them. "Richard's cap and his hair," she replied. "Who's that?" I asked her. She looked at me and said, "Your brother." Ah, Richard. Richard had died when I was nearly 4 from an aneurysm. Over the course of a month, it killed him in the end. And for many years, this story convinced me that I must have been unusually, or helped reinforce the sense that I must have been unusually traumatized if I had actually forgotten that my brother existed. This was one of the ways I held on to grief, thinking that that was special about me. It was really only later, when I listened to a friend talk about her work with grieving children of different ages, that I understood how normal that reaction was. Listening to my friend helped me grow spiritually, helped me give up a part of who I thought I was, that piece of identity that got in the way of my ability to listen to other people. I'm a minister, and I used to have trouble listening to people speak about death or grief. That's the story I wanted to share with you, and I invite you again now to think about what part of your story comes up when you're trying to listen. What makes you need to turn away or interrupt or change the subject? A need to be the center of attention? To be seen as wise or unimportant? Or a problem solver? Someone whose pain or grief is special, someone who can't do anything right. And when you consider what gets in your way to listening to other people, you might ask yourself, what can I do to become just a little less attached to that idea of myself so that I can listen better? The author Scott Peck has a wonderful description of the best kind of listening, what it requires and what it can give. He writes, "An essential part of true listening is the discipline of bracketing. Bracketing is the temporary giving up or setting aside of one's own prejudices, frames of reference, and desires, so as to experience as far as possible the speaker's world from the inside. This unification of speaker and listener is actually an extension of ourselves, and new knowledge is always gained. Moreover, since true listening involves bracketing, which is setting aside the self, it also temporarily involves a total acceptance of the other. Sensing this acceptance, the speaker will feel less and less vulnerable and more inclined to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener." Scott Peck's words also point us in the direction of explaining why true listening is a spiritual experience. When we're able to truly listen, we connect with each other in a way that is the holy. We connect in a way that allows us to know our essential unity. We put aside our ego, and we meet the holy in each other. Listening to ourselves is another special kind of listening. It's essential for self-knowledge, and it too is hard. Sometimes we sit down and we reflect and we try to understand what we are really feeling or thinking, but there's so much flotsam and jetsam floating around on the surface of our awareness that it gets in the way of our getting to the depths of ourselves. Our self-judgments, our worries, a million fragments of thought and feeling whirl around our consciousness constantly, blocking access to what is beneath. And if it wasn't hard enough to find a spot to dive in safely amid all that flotsam and jetsam, our fear of diving into the deep, even if we do see an opening, makes it even harder. Many of us fear what's down there inside us when we're quiet and still and in place. Many of us fear drowning in the feelings that we repress, fear what the whirling thought fragments might hide. Attentively noticing what we are thinking and feeling, and then letting that thought or that emotion keep moving, can help us get beneath all those currents of thought and feeling, can help us stabilize amidst the change and the flux. For this, silence and meditation are helpful. There's a third kind of listening I want to touch on briefly this morning. Listening to what is beyond us, as well as within us. Call it love, call it God, call it nature, call it history, call it emptiness. Listening to the world, the natural world especially, requires silence, as all listening does. When we listen for the stirring of God, or the stirring of nature, or for a sense of connection with all humanity that has come before us, we can call this special kind of listening a special name. We can call it prayer. The Christian Bible portrays God as one who longs to communicate with others. The Gospel of John puts it this way: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." According to this perspective, it's God's nature to speak. God is speaking and doing so in every facet of the universe. From this perspective, the question is, are we listening? And for naturalists, the sense of awe and beauty and power that can be found in the all-pervading realm of natural laws, in experiencing stars and darkness and tornadoes and the sea, these require listening too, not just with the ears, but with all the senses. There's a true convergence between how Scott Peck describes true listening as temporarily setting aside oneself, and the type of listening that is prayer to what is beyond us, regardless of what we call that. Joy Harjo, the poet whose interview was excerpted for the second reading, captures this kind of listening beautifully in her poem, The Eagle. To pray, you open your whole self, she writes, to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and to know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know, except in moments steadily growing and in languages that aren't sound, but other circles of motion. Like Eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We were born and die soon within a true circle of motion, like Eagle rounding out the morning inside us. We pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. Harjo is wise. To listen is to pray. To listen is to love. To listen is to settle down despite our swirling thoughts and our whirling emotions. maybe this year, we'll listen. May it be so, and amen.